And thank you, Ian, for that introduction. I mean, I have to say, after an introduction like that, I'm almost looking forward to what I've got to say. Thank you for inviting me. I was, a long time ago, a member of BACFI, and I was also on the Employed Barristers Committee of the Bar Council. So it's good to be sort of back in the fold. I guess I ought to be absolutely clear about one thing, is I'm not going to talk about the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So if there's several of you who joined thinking I was going to talk about the Equalities Act and what we do there as regulator, then please, I'll be totally honest, I'm not. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. I trust I'm not seeing everybody disappear from the call then. But what I'm going to talk about just for a few minutes is what equality, inclusion and diversity mean to me. This is very much a personal story and a bit of a reflection on my journey here and one or two of the things that I have learned on the way as an employed barrister. So, well, what is it all about? Well, I think if we look back to the last year, 2020, what's happened? Well, we've had in the I&D equality space, we've had Black Lives Matter. We've had trumpeting of the Hampton-Alexander report, getting 30% of women on listed company boards. They've been working a long time on that, but we've really got there. I sit on the Parker review onto ethnic minorities on boards. That's on everybody's lips at the moment, because FTSE 100 companies are supposed to have one ethnic minority on their board by the end of this year. We've had the Windrush scandal, where we've had threats of deportation to children of Commonwealth citizens. We've had, and this we've been very involved in, I've been involved in at the Commission, we've had anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and the investigation we did at the Commission basically saying that there was anti-Semitic behaviour. We've had allegations of unequal pay at the BBC. Again, the Commission have investigated that. We've had all the social inequalities of COVID. How various groups have been disproportionately affected, and particularly in education, with children of less advantaged backgrounds not having access to laptops, etc., not being able to go to school, and how their life chances have been really disadvantaged. And we've had more complex issues. So we've had probably the most ethnically diverse cabinet we ever have. But probably most of them are privately educated. They may do very well on ethnicity, but do we reflect the social mobility? So equality, diversity, inclusion, it's part of everyday life now. Everything that comes up, it doesn't go away. But if we go back nearly 20 years, when I was General Counsel at Babcock, shortly to leave and move to National Grid, it was a very, very different situation. And if you'd asked me 20 years ago, was I personally interested in equality, inclusion, diversity? I'd have said no, I wasn't. And I'm not being particularly politically correct either. So, you know, I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool I&D specialist or fan, etc. I don't come from that particular background. But what I have been really, really interested in for my entire working life is getting the best out of people at work. Babcock wasn't particularly into inclusion and diversity, and neither was National Grid when I went. But what I realised when I started to have teams of lawyers working for me, and other, it wasn't just lawyers, it was other people as well, other departments as well, was that if I was going to attract, if I was going to retain, if I was going to motivate the staff, I had to accommodate their needs as far as was practicable with as the business could allow. And I think in the legal profession, we always have quite a lot of a high percentage of women. And both Babcock and National Grid were overwhelmingly male organisations, but I was unusual in that I had teams where we were probably 50-50 male-female, even slightly more women than men. I also had people who had long commutes because of the way that the offices were based. And I had people with different religious needs as well, be they Jewish or Muslim or whatever. And I inherited quite a diverse team. And it seemed to me that if I was going to keep this team, and if I was going to get more people like them, and particularly if the young ladies were going to go off and have children, etc., I wanted them to come back. So what was I going to do to actually make sure that it was a place they wanted to work? And one of the ththings that I think is absolutely key for the whole inclusion and diversity agenda is flexible working. Now, we didn't have this at Babcock when I was there, and we didn't have it formally at Grid when I started. But what I was very keen to do was to talk to people about what worked best for them and to listen as to what they were saying. Now, this was particularly relevant when I went to Grid, because we were just going through a merger. The gas side, Lattice, merged with National Grid. That was pretty frenetic for everybody. Also, when two companies merge, you tend to sort of have two jobs doing one, so you were potentially losing people. Demergers are great for staff, mergers are less good for staff. So I basically sort of thought to myself, how am I going to get a high-performing team here that wants to work for me when we've got two companies in different places merging with each other? So I basically said, well, we can work flexibly. I did put some rules down. I said within the various teams, you've got to have one member of each team in the office each day. You can't all work at home on a Friday. I think in post-COVID days, I wouldn't have needed to say that, but remember, this was nearly 20 years ago. And I also said, I'm going to trust you. I think that's really key on all of this. But I said, if I find anybody abusing it, I'll stop it for everybody. We need to be clear about this. We have to have some rules around this. And I also had to beg, steal and borrow some extra money for laptops for people working from home. These were the days when it wasn't so easy. We didn't have all this super fast broadband, but we managed to get it to work, and work enough so that people actually, if they wanted to, could work away from the office or different hours or part-time or whatever. And actually, I got lucky on this, because when we started, when I sort of said to people, right, we can do this flexible working, the first 3 people that asked to work flexibly were all men. And that actually was really fortunate, because I think there is a perception in some areas that flexible working is all for women, it's all for mums. But because it was men who were first asked me to work flexibly, it was because they had long commutes and they didn't want to be in the office 5 days a week. That was fine. What did I find out of it after 3 or 4 months of it? How did it go? Well, it was absolutely great. People were much happier. We had all sorts of flexible working arrangements, be it full-time but partly from home, or different hours, or part-time, coming in earlier, going home later, etc. It worked really, really well. I had one guy who worked full-time. He worked 1 day a week from home, possibly 2. But on one day he worked at home for various personal reasons. He didn't want to work between 1 and 5, so he took that afternoon off. He then logged in again at 5 and worked from 5 till 9. Absolutely perfect, because we had a huge business in the US, because they were still working with the time lag. They thought it was great, and it worked fine for me. I had mums logging in later. I had some people who would stop work at 3 o'clock and go and pick children up, but log in later, pick up things. Also, with an open plan office, they could use confidential work at home. That was helpful. Sometimes it was difficult given the nature of what we did on the legal side. It was great for them working from home. That worked. And I also found that when I was recruiting people, I had some wonderful people wanting to come and work for me. I had no problem in getting really good caliber people from law firms. Yes, we didn't pay as much, but the flexible working and the quality of the work, etc., encouraged an awful lot of very good people to come and work. So it became the norm, not the exception, and people felt very included in it. They didn't feel that, oh, well, it's only me who's working part-time or from home. It was all part of the work ethic. So that was fine in the legal department, and I carried on doing this for several years informally. And then when we get to the sort of mid-noughties, I think companies were getting a little bit more aware that they all should be doing something about it. Certainly were at National Grid, and we had all sorts of things happening. We concentrated first on women. I think that was probably because of women on boards was coming through the really starting to get some traction behind it. And we had all sorts of things. We had events, we set up networks, we had teach-ins, and we had an executive committee sponsor, etc. It was all very well meaning. It wasn't terribly coordinated, I have to say, and I really didn't take too much part in it. I was doing my bit with my team and carrying on the flexible working and hopefully doing okay with it. But in 2008, the executive sponsor at Grid left. He was on the executive committee, and I just sort of said, almost about thinking about it, well, can I take on the sponsorship instead of him? And the CEO said, well, yes, I suppose. I didn't really think you were interested in inclusion and diversity, and I explained some of the stuff I had been doing. Well, he sort of said, well, you know, a willing volunteer is better than 2 pressed men. If you want to do it, you can do it. So I thought, well, this will be interesting. Let's see how we go. Somebody who actually worked for me at Babcock and then had come to Grid, not to work for me particularly, sent me an email saying, well done about doing this. But don't forget the 75% white men who don't think this diversity stuff has anything to do with us. And that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. Here was I, very bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, thinking I'm going to sort out inclusion and diversity at National Grid, and thinking I've probably got 3/4 of the workforce who aren't interested in this. So anyway, I ploughed on, but it did sort of think to me, you know, I've got to get everybody engaged in this. I fortunately got a bit of money from my CEO to get some outside help in, and we had a few focus groups for different areas to see what people felt about all of this. And also we were big in the US, so that there were some different issues in the US to the UK. I had a big legal team, but was small compared to the overall number of people we had working in the organisation. But what came out of that were several things, which I think are really very relevant if you're going to move inclusion and diversity on wherever you work, be you work as a lawyer or in business or whatever. And I think you really have to get a clear business case of why all this business about inclusion and diversity is important. For me, my business case, even though I hadn't articulated it myself, was getting the best out of people. And that's probably in everybody's business case somewhere. But for other businesses, it will differ. So if, for example, you work for a retail business and 80% of your customers are women, and you don't have any women managers or any women on the board, how on earth are you going to relate to your customer base? If you sell all your business into Asia and you have all Europeans on your board or in your senior management, surely that's wrong. It's not going to reflect what your business is actually doing. It's not going to motivate your employees. So I think where I came to was that, diversity is really important, but it may not motivate people. But inclusion should, because inclusion affects everybody. If you feel included, you're happier, you work better. And I do think names do matter on all of this. And one thing I would say, and we've changed it since I went on the board of SSE, I would say that it's very important to talk about inclusion and diversity, not diversity and inclusion, because inclusion affects everybody. Equality is important as well, but you're never going to get everybody equal. You will always have somebody at the top of the tree who's more equal than others, to quote George Orwell. There will always be a hierarchy. Under the Equalities Act, of course, you should follow everything. You should have equal pay for equal work, but you are not going to get somebody who is relatively junior paid the same as the CEO. It's going to be different. But having an inclusive workforce, I actually think the diversity will follow. And one of the things we did at Grid was we did inclusive leadership training. And we did this right from the board downwards. So even the non-executive directors had inclusive leadership training. The executive had it, the managers, supervisors, graduates. And it was all basically about how you treated people and getting the best out of people. I don't even think we mentioned the word diversity in it. But in my view, if you get the inclusion right, the diversity will follow. Now, where have we come to on diversity? Well, I think diversity has moved on a lot as well in the last sort of 10, 15 years. It started with women, I think, as I've said, and then I think it was moved much on to sort of minorities, ethnic minorities, racial minorities. But now we're talking about diversity in such broad forms. People with disabilities, I'll come back to that in a minute. Cognitive diversity, groupthink, very bad for business and teams. Social mobility, the background of people. Neurodiversity as well we talk about, which is different from cognitive diversity. Neurodiversity, where you have people who may have autism or Asperger's, incredibly bright people, but have different management needs. And if you're going to get the best out of them, you have to treat them perhaps in a different way. Social mobility, come back to, I think that's a huge issue at the moment. If you're a young lass or laddie who's been brought up in a tower block, perhaps sharing a bedroom with 2 or 3 others, sharing a laptop, maybe you're very had different educational challenges, Maybe you didn't go to the best universities, maybe you didn't get a first from Oxford or whatnot, but you went to perhaps a second-tier university and still got a really good degree. You have such a range of life experiences that business and law firms should want to have, that people who've just been privately educated and have silver spoons in their mouth won't have. So I do think some of the recruitment that we look at, a lot of people say, well, you have to have a 2-1 from a Russell Group university. Is that really right? Are you excluding a lot of people who actually, have a lot of resilience, a lot of experience, who would benefit any department that they work in? I also think we need to think about diversity in the bar. I mean, employed barristers have a lot different range of diverse skills than the self-employed bar. I think that's one of the great things about being an employed barrister. It's not just the law and the advocacy, it's management, it's understanding your business, it's the commercial realities. We are a much more diverse body than most self-employed barristers. So what can sort of finish on this, I suppose, with 3 things. One is I have no qualifications, expertise at all in inclusion and diversity, none. It's just what I've learnt on the job. I now get asked to give talks on this as, somebody who's a sort of expert in it and whatnot. I most certainly am not. And, I may have got it wrong, but I do have a passion about it. The irony of it is, it now forms quite a part of my day. Being an Equality and Human Rights Commissioner, I co-chair the Employers Social Mobility Alliance, which is trying to work with businesses, the third sector and schools to really crack this social mobility issue that we've got. I sit on the Parker Review. I'm very involved with a whole load of issues that involve with inclusion and diversity, even though that's not my area of expertise at all. And it's great. I would also encourage people for their own development. If you're working in a company and you're interested in some of these other softer areas, you can do things afterwards, and also not bad for your CV. COVID, what's happened with COVID on this? Well, I think the inclusion and diversity debate has moved on with COVID. I hate to say there's positives that come out of COVID. I think there isn't. It's been awful. But just as after the First World War, it certainly contributed to women getting the vote, which was a good thing. I think there are 3, I hate to say the word positives, but there are some things we can take that COVID has moved on. The first one is flexible working. I think that flexible working in the last 10 months has moved on 10 years. I think law firms and a lot of financial institutions have really had the jackets over the back of the seats mentality. You've got to be in the office, 7 till 8 in the morning till the evening. Maybe you can work, occasionally from home. That has just changed completely now, and we can see that everybody can work effectively from home. Yeah, people want to get back to the office for social interaction. They want to get back and meet their teams, particularly young people. But it's never going to be as the way it was, in my view. The offices are going to be very, very different, and I think that will be very helpful for the inclusion and diversity debate. So I think that is a positive. The second thing I think that's really positive for the I&D debate is how we deal with mental health. People like Prince William have done wonders with opening up the debate on mental health. The boss of Lloyd's a few years ago, CEO, I can't pronounce his name, it's Spanish, taking time out because he had stress issues was great. It was okay for him. He can come back again. It's demystified it a lot. But I don't think there's anybody in the UK or Europe at the moment who hasn't had some sort of mental health issues due to COVID. We've all had our black days. Be it whatever you're trying to educate the kids, whether you're missing your family, whether you've got other health issues. We've all done that, and from right to the top to the bottom, and it's okay, and it's okay not to be okay. I think the mental health agenda has moved on considerably, which is positive. I'm not saying mental health issues are positive, but the fact we can talk about it and deal with it, and companies and law firms are getting a lot better with it, accepting it, I think that is positive. And the third thing is on the disability agenda. We will all have worked with people who we thought had absolutely no health issues, and they've been shielding because of some unknown, some factor within them. I think it's made us look at things very differently. I also think that It's helped in some ways people with disabilities. I have a friend who's a senior lawyer who has not been able to travel so much over the last 3 years for health issues, and has found himself, although he's very senior, joining a lot of meetings by phone and video prior to COVID, and felt really he was the only one not in the office and felt excluded. Now everybody's at home. It's much easier for him. He feels much more included because it's a level playing field. And I think there is a positive there for people with disabilities. And finally, I just want to give you one sort of real life example about inclusion and what it really means. I said earlier we did inclusive leadership training at National Grid, which was all about how you treat people, how you get the best out of people. It wasn't rocket science at all. It was really very straightforward. But after that, young man came into my office. He ran one of our non-regulated businesses. I thought he was absolutely got the I&D agenda. He had a very diverse workforce. You know, he was one of the stars, I thought. And he came in and he said, I've just done that leadership training, you know. And I thought, oh, he's about to complain. He didn't like it. He said, it was really good. So I thought, oh, that's great. He said, I've been getting things all wrong. And I looked at him and sort of looked at him rather surprised. He said, yes, he said, I've been having for the last 18 months, my team meeting for my direct reports, however many there were, 10 or 12 of them, I've had it at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning because it suits me. I always get into the office early, start of the week. And he said, I've made sure they've all been in the office too. He said, I've just realised that is completely the wrong thing to do, because there's people wanting to take their kids to school, there's people who work well away from home and they're coming in, you know, having to come in extra early for Monday, there's traffic issues. He said the only person that it actually suited to have a meeting at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning was me. He said, and I chatted to people about this, and we've decided now we're going to have our team meeting at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, and we can do it by dial-in or phone-in. He said, we've been doing like that for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and the team meetings have gone ever so well, and people seem very happy about it. He said, they all seem much more motivated. I said, I think that's what it's all about. I leave you with that. I'm happy to answer any questions, but for me, it's all about inclusion. The diversity will follow, and the equality, well, very important to be equality under the Equalities Act, but to me, it's the I&D, and don't worry so much about the equality. That's it, Ian. I think I've done my 20 minutes.
Well, thank you, Helen. So does anybody have any questions? You can either raise them in the chat box, or you can just raise your hand and then speak them, you know, show yourself.
I can't see anything in the chat box.
Oh, Narinda. Would you like to ask questions? Is everyone up, Sandra?
They are. An echo.
I can't.
Hi, Helen. This is Lawrence. Thank you
Hello.
for
Yes.
a really good presentation. That was certainly opened my eyes, and I thought I'd seen it all. That was tremendous. Thank you very much. What do you think about mandatory obligations to report on, for example, disparity in ethnicity in pay data? I think the government's consulting on that right now, and I think FTSE companies are potentially going to have to break down their pay by, for example, ethnic origin and so on, which will obviously put a spotlight on perhaps, you know, bad practice. Is mandatory the way to go, or is voluntary the best way to go, do you think, in your experience?
Well, the first thing being very practical, if they want the Equalities and Human Rights Commissioner to be the regulator of it, like we are on gender pay reporting, I hope we get more bodies to do it, because it's quite a lot of work. Do I think mandatory is, you know, it's very, very difficult. I think sometimes mandatory is the only way to go. It's like people ask me occasionally, do I agree with targets for having women and ethnic minorities on boards? And I personally think if I've ever been recruited to a board because I had to meet a target and I was there because they needed a woman, I'd be really quite sort of, you know, offended about it. But in sometimes you need not just the carrot, you need the stick. And I think there is a tendency on companies. I mean, you know, the gender pay reporting isn't always easy to do. Government's making it mandatory. I think at this stage, probably with everything that businesses have to do with COVID, it's probably not the right time. But I think they have to give thought to it in future. I mean, for example, with gender pay, the gap, you didn't have to do that. We basically had a moratorium on that during COVID because businesses have been so busy doing other things, you know, that we have to look at what's it's, you know, really, really important and what's perhaps secondary importance. So I think maybe the way to go is say, well, voluntary reporting for a year or two, and if we don't get voluntary reporting that's meaningful, we have to make it mandatory.
Right. We've got a question from Narinder. Sandra, could you unmute him? Doesn't sound very nice, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Hi, Ian.
There we are, Narinder. Hi, it's good to see you. Narinder is a fellow Middle Templar as well.
Right. Can't
Good
see
to see
you,
you.
but I can see you. I can hear you.
Okay, Helen.
Oh,
the question is really about the Bar Council and the Inns of Court. I mean, I personally, and I'm from an ethnic minority, but that's not the issue. I sit on numerous boards and things like that. I've been the chair of boards and things like that. But the point is, I don't feel confident that the Bar Council and the Inns of Court are really taking this matter seriously. And my feeling is that all we are getting is chatter about it. And I attended something yesterday as well, on another Zoom call, a Teams call, and it was the one of the ladies who made a presentation, who is a judge. She made the point, and also one final point is, I think that a lot of people, even from the BAME community, should really, take a look at themselves. And I'm reminded of Michael Jackson's song "Man in the Mirror," and I think we need to look everyone. So just really a comment there. But my concern is how serious you think the Inns of Court and the Bar Council is on this matter.
Well, I think that's a very, very good question. I'm going to be completely honest on this. I mean, my dealings with the Bar Council, and when I was a member, sort of the mid, 2005, 6, 7, etc. I then had a great gap and didn't have anything to do with the Bar or Middle Temple until about a year ago, when I've suddenly sort of come back and been made a bencher and whatnot. So I have a great gap in how they've moved on. I would say various things from my very external experience, that it's really important to have good role models at the top. How many chairmen of the bar have we had that have been ethnic minorities? I mean, we've had a few women now. Have we had any chairmen of the bar have been ethnic minorities? Have we had any under treasurers or whatever, the treasurers at Middle Temple, that have been ethnic minorities? How many people have we got in really important positions who are minorities, who people can say, gosh, he or she's done that, that's what I want to do, it's possible. So I think I don't see much of that happening, but please, I'm not dyed in the wool Middle Temple or Bar, because I have a big gap in my history with them. I think that where we're getting with things like, appointment of silk and appointment of judges, where the state is much more involved, whatever they call it, Judicial Appointments Commission or whatever they call it now. I think there's a lot more happening there, and there's a government push that, which is really important. I don't know what's happening much in the circuits, but I think, when I look around, it's quite funny actually. I was, the reason I got back involved in Middle Temple, I was one of these women in Middle Temple Hall who was sort of had their picture up because of 100 years of women in the law, and there was a good mixture of there, people like Shami Chakrabarti, and various. I mean, there were lots of different, and quite a few ethnic minorities on that. But if you actually looked round the room at the older benches there, you know, there were a lot of the old people that I'd sort of known 30 or 40 years ago that were my generation that were white and male. There wasn't a huge amount in the senior positions of ethnic minorities, and I thought that's actually strange. They're not keeping up with the times. I would have expected it 30, 40 years ago, and even maybe 15 years ago, but I think there's more that can be done, absolutely more that can be done. You know, I've just joined the membership committee at Middle Temple as well, and I think that's important that, you know, we look at what's good for members too, because if you're encouraging more minorities, you'll get them coming through on committees and whatnot. So, you know, there's always more to be done. And I'm always happy to sort of, you know, ask the difficult question. I mean, I think on the membership committee, we may be all white. So that'll probably be my first question at my first meeting when I turn up. Why are we all white?
Yeah, that's a good point.
We may not be, I don't know, but I think we are.
Well, I'm on the Bar Council, and under the chairmanship of Amanda Pinto, an awful lot has been done with changing the constitution of the Bar Council to make it more accessible, changing the rules so that meetings can be done remotely and things like that, and also trying to get the chairmanship of all the different committees to turn around, so you don't get one person that's chairing a committee for a long period of time and kind of blocking fresh people coming through. So I think there is quite an impetus in the Bar Council to change things. The fact that this is an event which is a joint event with the Bar Council shows that there is an appetite and a willingness to get things to be changed. So I'm very positive and hopeful, but there's always a lot more to do.
Well, I know what we're doing with Lawrence and Ian and I at Middle Temple on the you know, Employed Bar Working Group. I mean, we're being, and I think we've sort of led a bit of a charge on this, doing a lot of things virtually, and we will continue to do them virtually because we don't all work around the Inns of Court. Probably most of us don't. So having to flog into Middle Temple to events is not very appealing, but it's fine sitting at home or wherever we are in our office, joining at 5 or 6 o'clock. Which is really great, which suits us. And there is a, you know, that's a perception, Middle Temple, well, you're all around the inn. Well, you're not if you're an employed barrister, probably. So we've been able to, you know, we're a bit more inclusive in that way. So yeah, but good. I'm glad to hear that they're moving on, Ian.
Yeah. So any thank you, Narinda. Any other questions or any just comments that people want to make or suggestions of how you think we can improve things in this area?
Abigail, I think I saw a hand go up. Is that Abigail? Oh, there you are. Marvellous.
Right, Abigail.
Hi, lovely to meet you all, and thank you so much for such an interesting and insightful talk, Helen. My question is in relation to social mobility. So I am from quite a deprived area. I grew up in a single parent household, and I'm hoping to become a barrister and commence the bar course. What more might be done within the legal profession, do you think, to promote social inclusion and diversity? Unfortunately, I know I'm still quite young and inexperienced in my experience of the profession, but I am yet to meet people, or at least a lot of people who I think are like myself.
Yep.
Thank you.
Very, very important question. And the reason I'm interested in social mobility is because I was the first person to go to university in my family, and going to the bar, I had nobody to ask. I didn't know any lawyers, didn't know any barristers, didn't know anybody, and it was hard work. So I think it's a really important question. I'm relatively new back in the fold with Middle Temple, but it's on my agenda, and I put it on my bencher form that I need to talk to them about social mobility and what are they doing more, because I think there's a lot that the bar could do more of, is working with, for example, schools perhaps in deprived areas who've got bright kids, you know, back to doing their A-levels, maybe wanting to go to law, giving them not pupillage or anything, but just give them a work experience. What is it like in chambers? We've been doing quite a lot with this. I'm a patron of the Social Mobility Business Partnership, and we do a lot of work experience for disadvantaged schools all around the country, hundreds of them, in law firms and companies, etc. Now, that they don't all want to be lawyers; they might want to be finances. But they, you know, they want to actually We want them to raise their aspirations. You could be a lawyer, you could be an accountant, you could be a finance director. We also give them, they also work with, you know, we get them a lot of sports people ranging from Arsenal and Harlequins and all sorts, to give them resilience training. But it's raising expectations, and it's getting people like yourself, just showing them what it's all about, and understanding the Chamber's setup, understanding some of the you know, the difficulties and the setback, but also what scholarships are there, what support you can get, what money there might be. I know the Young Bar are putting together some quite good stuff on that, but I don't think that the Bar Council or the Inns do enough on it. Now, I have to say I'm new back to this, so there may be a lot going on I don't know about. But, you know, it doesn't cost much. And I also think there's quite a lot of chambers and a lot of companies who employ lawyers who would happily, you know, have kids come in for a day and tell them about what they do. It doesn't cost an awful lot. So a lot more that could be done. Really good that you're joining things like this to hear old people like me talk. I think it's wonderful, absolutely marvellous, and, you know, great attitude asking questions. So, you know, you tick a lot of boxes already.
And also, I mean, Abigail, I mean, I went to a comprehensive school. I went to a polytechnic to do my law degree. And then when I went to the bar, I remember the first time I had to dine in hall, I felt physically sick because there seemed to be all these social etiquette rules that I seemed to be totally unaware of. And then one of the stewards told me off because my suit was too light in colour. And you know, I felt like running away and bursting into tears. So all those kind of practical and logistical things. So one of the things is I would try and, I mean, one of the good things if you're a student member of BACFI is it's a good way to network, and perhaps some of our members might be willing to sort of mentor you as well and just give you tips on, you know, some of the silliest questions that you have. But if you don't come from a background that is in, I mean, none of my family were ever in the law, and you know, and I was the first of my generation to do a degree. So yeah, so you know, do use these as opportunities to get to know experienced barristers, and you know, perhaps try and arrange, even if it's an informal mentorship arrangement. But I think that I would have found that very helpful if someone had actually guided me through the inn the first time. It would have been less intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I see there's loads of hands gone up now. Gosh.
Wow, good. Well, thank you, Abigail, and do keep in touch with us, because very keen to see how you get on. Are you doing the law degree at the moment, or what are your plans?
Yeah, so I actually graduated from the conversion course after doing a history degree, and I've got my scholarship interview with Middle Temple in April. And, sorry, and I've my chosen question is about diversity and inclusion, so I'm trying to educate myself as much as possible on this subject. So thank you.
Oh, great. Well, best of luck, Abigail, and keep in touch with us and see how you get on. Yeah. So I think we've got a question from Rebecca.
Yes.
Rebecca Morris, or Becky, as I know.
Oh, that's me. Yes. I think you've raised that is such an important point there, Ian. What you were saying about your suits is the power of storytelling, of people going through their careers, and also those key rules, particularly if they're soft rules or ones that are not spoken about. I think that's such a powerful thing in respect to equality and inclusion, and particularly within diversity, because often when people feel nervous or entering something, it just feels like somebody has got your back, or you've put your hand on their shoulder, so to speak. So the power of storytelling and personal storytelling, I think, is absolutely key in inclusion. So it's just a comment.
Very good. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. So we've got a question from Shah21M, as it comes up on the screen. Sorry if I got your name wrong.
No, sorry, I think that's my university email.
I see.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like MI5.
Yes.
No, sorry. Hi, thank you, Helen, for your talk. It was really great. Sorry,
Sure.
my name is Mariam. I guess my question was kind of, so I'm not at the inns yet. I'm kind of like Abigail. I've just come from uni and doing scholarship interview now. But my experience as an ethnic minority, I kind of really identify with a lot of the things that you said, because as an ethnic minority that went to Oxford, I identify with what you said, Ian, about going to a hall and being surrounded by people that seem to know exactly what to do, and you have to pretend like you know what's going on. And I guess my question was essentially, as at Oxford, I was part of a working group where they asked us why we think that there's such a high BME dropout rate. So even though the admission statistics are leveling up, BME students keep dropping out and rusticating essentially. And what we tried to share to them was that the focus on admissions and the obsession over admission statistics was leading Oxford to not focus on the actual experience, like ignoring the experience of students. And it was almost because the intention was wrong in this sort of tick box exercise just to get, you know, enough BME people in. This lack of focus on experience was thwarting, you know, the statistics anyway. And so I guess in a roundabout way, I'm asking, what do you think the Inns of Courts can do to, once you have, you know, BME people in or in the Inns, what can they do to improve experience? Because an example I could give is that as a Muslim person, a lot of networking is just completely drinking based, and a lot of social events are completely drinking based, and that's just a huge turn off, or even like a kind of obstacle. But that's a very specific need for a minority religion, and if we want to take inclusion further, I feel like those needs need to be asked about, and then there needs to be, you know, like non-drinking events, like mandatory ones, and networking schemes that aren't so based on, you know, going to the pub and stuff like that. And so I guess my question is, what more can be done to really actually tailor the Inns of Court to the specific needs of different minorities to enhance their experience so that they stick with the courts, stick with the Inns and stick with the bar rather than drop out?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying about university. I mean, at business, I used to call it the leaky bucket syndrome. We could get people in very well, but then they all sort of, you know, were different. They weren't sort of feeling there was the right environment to stay, and they left. I mean, the Inns, I think, can do a lot more. Just using my business experience, I mean, when I ran inclusion and diversity at Grid, we had a huge range of ethnic minorities, and we really didn't understand what their needs were. So there's a lot of education that can be done. You know, have a Muslim evening at Middle Temple, so that Muslim barristers can come and talk us about what's really important to them. You know, what happens in Ramadan. I mean, I didn't realize I had a Jain, somebody who was in Jainism work. I didn't even know what Jainism was. You know, I had somebody come and talk about that. If you had Sikhs different, you know, maybe have an evening where you have a Sikh, a Muslim, a Jewish person, and talk about the different things and talk about what matters to them and what, you know, they would like to have. And the fact it is difficult, there's always alcohol. I mean, the bar's aptly named, you know, I mean, it's completely named. It is about alcohol, but we don't all want to drink. So I think if there was more education, that people could tailor events, and you know, there may be events that actually do involve alcohol, but if they were just done in a slightly different way, more Muslims would come, because drinking wasn't absolutely the part of it. It just was a sideline, and it was actually an education thing. Yeah. So, you know, what would you like to see more of? And what could be, you know, what could be done more? I think there has to be sort of proactive from minority groups. But also just your understanding about the Middle Temple and the bar, understanding a little bit more about the small things that could change, that could just make things a lot more attractive for people like you to come to. So, because I can quite see that. I mean, you know, I think, to be honest, when I was called to the bar, which was an awful long time ago, nearly 40 years ago, there was a problem where it was a very male thing, and women felt excluded, to be honest. And we never said much. I mean, I think that's changed hugely, but now I can completely see where you're coming from. I think it's people with disabilities as well. I mean, I don't think they're very well accommodated. So, you know, Bar needs to do more about it, absolutely more about it. And I think there's a lot of education on both sides.
Yeah. So, and, you know, by belonging to different groups like this and trying to inform as well as learn yourself, because there's lots of things we could learn. I mean, one of the things that the Bar Council has, a race working group has introduced, is reverse mentoring, where people of ethnic minorities mentor a senior barrister to make that senior barrister understand the issues that different ethnic minorities have. So, and I think our second equality and inclusion event, it will be looking at that. But do have a look on the Bar Council website, race working group, and look it up. And there are lots of initiatives, so do have a look at that as well. And I say, if you keep involved with our group, then we've got 2 other equality and diversity events, and they'll be looking at issues of race and religion and ethnic minorities as well. Okay.
I see some more hands up, Ian. I think we've got 3 more,
yes,
haven't we?
So thank you for that, and I'll move on to Ryan. Ryan, I know you well. Hi, Ryan.
Hello, Ian. I just wanted to perhaps mention to the students, in case they're not already aware, that a young barrister wrote a book last year, very much on this topic. It was called Hanif Mohammed, I think. And the book was called People Like Us. And he'd been a refugee and arrived as a sort of maybe a teenager, but managed to build a successful career at the bar. And from the radio interviews he did, I very much got the impression that he realised he would have to meet the bar at least halfway. So despite coming from a sort of deprived background in the East End, he's developed a lot of the cultural capital, I think he would call it, of typical members of the bar. He's decided to share their interests in rugby and music. And I think there's an element that people have to code switch or learn how to fit into that environment if it's their ambition to succeed at the bar in the short term.
Yes, yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I think one has to, you know, you have to stick to your own values and your own character. So it's fine to sort of show and learn an interest about rugby or whatever that's going to help you. But, you know, you shouldn't have to do that to exclusion of all else. I have to say, one of the boards I was on, I won't say which one, I very much enjoyed it. But we had on the board also the chairman of a very well-known rugby team, and it was all male board apart from me. And at every breakout and every lunch and every coffee, all the directors all wanted to talk about rugby, particularly to hear all the gossip from this chairman of a well-known rugby team. And my very last board meeting, when they started to talk about rugby again, I said, excuse me, could we talk about something I want to talk about this time, please? And they looked very suddenly and said, well, aren't you interested in rugby? I said, I've learned an awful lot. My husband's terribly impressed at my knowledge now, but no, I'm not really. So could we talk about what I want to talk about? And they looked rather shocked at that. So I think, you know, you're right in saying you've got to be a bit chameleon-like, but you also have to stand your own ground as well. And you know, perhaps talk about things you're interested in too. So it's not easy, but I do find the bar is not that accommodating to perhaps people who have different interests, because you're right, they do all tend to sort of come from the same mentality.
Yeah, I mean, as a gay man, the thought of talking about football and rugby, particularly when I'm in an all-male group, can be just as terrifying for me as well, because I know nothing about it. Although I did attend a diversity event at National Grid that had, I can't remember his name now. He was the first professional rugby player to come out.
Oh, Gareth Thomas.
Yeah, he did.
Lovely
and
guy,
I got invited, and it was a very interesting talk.
Yeah, I met him too. He's a very lovely guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Right, so we've got Ralph who wants to ask a question. Ralph?
Yes, hello. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Helen. You mentioned, social mobility. A slightly side issue is, okay, one of the benefits of COVID, if you call it a benefit, is one doesn't have to commute. Because certainly in the self-employed bar, it seems very London-centric. And whether one is commuting for a job, any job, or for the bar, to the courts, or to chambers, is that living in London is inaccessible for so many people. But if one has to commute, one is whacked with the cost of commuting.
Yeah.
So is the employed bar, I mean, because I've been looking through the list of some of the organisations that are there, less London-centric than the self-employed bar. And obviously there seems to be more allowances for being able to work from home, not having to commute. So what's being done to encourage, notwithstanding COVID, where one has to make an application or an interim application or even appeal online via Zoom or Teams. But in terms of practice, day-to-day practice, especially in contentious issues, or even just day-to-day commercial issues, is the employed bar, bearing in mind what you said about flexible working, less London-centric and more likely to, even when we come out of COVID, likely to remain, or now to change to becoming a more flexible, the organisation will be more flexible, you don't have to commute all the time, it's not London-centric. Ian, you said you're in Leamington Spa, that sounds reassuring that someone isn't in London.
Well,
yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I mean, I think the employed bar is much more flexible, and I think it will move much more quicker than the self-employed bar to continue this way of working.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked for multinational companies for most of my life. I've worked in Liverpool, I've worked in Norwich, I've worked in Birmingham. So most of my legal career was not London-based, and I did high-quality legal work. And wherever a company has its headquarters, there's usually at least one lawyer in that company, and that lawyer can be a barrister. So yes, I think there are much more opportunities for the employed bar to work outside London. I mean, one of our members of the committee, Grant, has just moved to Sydney, Australia. So, you can have an international legal career if you want. So I think it's much easier, and particularly if you work for large multinational companies like National Grid, they tend to be more at the forefront of inclusion policies and tend to, I mean, when I did my first 6 months pupillage, I found it was all public school and I felt very excluded. I actually did a commercial pupillage for a company called GC Plessy Telecoms. And the day I joined that company, I just fell in love in working in-house, because no one ever asked me where I went to university. No one asked me what school. What they were interested was I was going to get their contract done for the supplier that were doing. They weren't interested in my background. They were more interested about what I could do. And I found it much more empowering. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, in terms of interest, though, I'm not a rugby fan either. But if there are any Europhiles out there, especially Francophiles or Germanophiles who like good food and good wine, you'll find a kindred spirit in me.
Yes. Well, thanks, Ralph, for asking that question. We're really running out of time, so we've got Ewan McLeod on the line as well. Ewan actually works for the Bar Standards Board. So, Ewan,
hello.
Hi.
Hi, thanks, Ian. I was actually moved to say something in response to the point that Ryan made, and I think Helen's already broadly answered it, but I would just agree with what she said. And my colleague Amit, who's our head of equality and access to justice, says diversity is inviting someone to the party, but inclusion is asking them to dance.
Yeah.
And I was really I was really interested in what Helen said about focusing on inclusion, because I think, I mean, the Inns and other parts of the bar do really great work in terms of outreach and bringing people into the profession. And I've heard lots of barristers say, I wouldn't be in the profession at all if it wasn't for my Inn.
Yeah.
But then you often hear people say things like, oh, well, it helped me to adapt to the culture in the bar, and it helped me to learn all the manners that you need to be at the bar. And part of me thinks, well, do you know what? I don't care if my barrister knows which fork to use at dinner. I care if they're a good advocate. So I think we need to be careful that we don't, require people from different backgrounds to assimilate into the dominant culture at the bar. I think it's important that we are welcoming of difference at the same time. And I think that will hopefully help retention as well, because as others have said, it's not just about getting people in, it's about keeping them once they're there.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And getting them to the top of the profession as well. So
absolutely, progression is an important issue.
Yeah.
Right, well, thank you, and I think on that it's 7 o'clock. So I really want to thank Helen for a really thought-provoking and excellent talk, and I really want to thank all the people that contributed to that debate, some really interesting points. So just to remind you that we've got 2 more inclusion and events coming up throughout the year. And next week we've got a very different topic. We're talking about IR35 and the changes to taxation of the self-employed, and that's on the 4th of February. So details are on our website, but please do register for that event as well. And then in March, we've got a really interesting event called The Only Way is Ethics, which is about ethics and the employed bar and some of the issues that employed barristers may come across. So hopefully you'll all register for those events. So thanks again, Helen, and hope you all have a good evening. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks very much.